Hello, and thank you for joining the CannAtlantic Conference, the country's first Mid-Atlantic cannabis conference, brought to you by the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. If you're watching this session is about West Virginia's cannabis market. What's happening in the Mountain State? It's been a little bit of a sleep and maybe a little bit under the radar, but things seem to be picking up, and we will be learning about what's going on here thanks to our presenters, Danielle Waltz and Forbes. I will have them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are, and then they will present the West Virginia's State of State Cannabis Report. Danielle and Jesse, take it away. Thank you so much for supporting the CannAtlantic Conference, and thank you for presenting as well.
Well, Tahid, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. I'm really pleased to be joined by Jesse Forbes, who I think is probably more of an expert in this area than I am. As you said, my name is Danielle Waltz, and I'm a member at Jackson Kelly, a law firm that's located in West Virginia, but we're also located in a number of other states. And how I sort of ended up in this space is that our law firm has a significant amount of experience in Colorado, who, as we all know, has been leading the way in the marijuana space. So when West Virginia started looking at this issue, I began working with some of the attorneys out in Colorado to work to help shape the law here in West Virginia, and then also help clients navigate the different permitting process, et cetera, and continue to work with local officials. So that's really the role that I've played in this space. We're excited to talk to you about sort of where we are in West Virginia with respect to marijuana law and where we might be going. And want to turn it over to my co-presenter, Jesse Forbes. So really excited again, who's here with us today.
Thanks, Danielle, and thanks, Tahid, for having us. As Danielle mentioned, my name's Jesse Forbes. I'm also an attorney in West Virginia. I'm located in Charleston, our capital city. And in 2017, I had the privilege of being appointed to the West Virginia Medical Cannabis Advisory Board by our state's governor. As Tahid mentioned, we have flown a little bit under the radar here in West Virginia. We're a small state and a fairly rural state. But we did enact a law in 2017 to allow medical cannabis. And I want to kind of address the current state of that and dive into some of the things that are on the slide here. But I did just want to give everyone kind of a background of how West Virginia got to where it is. And we've been moving relatively slowly since the enaction of the law, but that's due to some things that had to be changed and fixed locally through our legislature. But essentially, the law went into place in 2017, approving medical cannabis in the Mountain State. And it has still not been fully implemented as we sit here in 2020. The good news is that my understanding from a board meeting that we had last week is that the first of the permits for growers in West Virginia have now been scored, and the scores have been totaled, and the awards are going to be announced this week for the grower permits. We expect the processor and dispensary permits to move fairly quickly from that. And our state's Department of Health and Human Resources, which houses the Office of Medical Cannabis that's over top of the program per the code, has said that they expect the program to be fully operational by late spring of 2021. And so when we passed the law, we were the 29th state to have passed medical cannabis. I know that there's been several others since that time, but we still, West Virginia, unfortunately, a lot of times is the butt of some jokes of being last in a lot of things, and we're still likely, to be towards the middle of this and getting out ahead of a number of other states that haven't implemented this law yet. So we're happy with that. The progress right now is sort of rooted in the law, and I want to kind of walk everybody through how we got here. So in 2017, we were really under the radar. It's my understanding there wasn't even really much of a national lobbying effort to bring medical cannabis into West Virginia. Our legislature has become very conservative over the last decade or so, and as a result of that, I think it was really thought by a lot of the national folks, and the people that have come to our board meetings have reiterated this, that they didn't see West Virginia really even on the map as being a state that was likely to implement or legalize any form of cannabis. However, it really got traction and took hold in 2017, and passed the legislature, passed both houses, and was signed into law by the governor. The board was put in place to kind of review our law and compare it to other states and see how it was viable moving forward. And there were unfortunately a number of issues with the law that was enacted. The major one had to do with banking and making sure that banks could comport with federal law so they could actually become operational. Initially, as the law was written, the state couldn't even take the application fees because they didn't have a place through the treasurer's office to deposit it that would have been legal and not gotten into trouble with any of the issues with the banks that the state used or jeopardize any of their federal status. So those things had to be fixed. There was also a major push for vertical integration. Our initial law only allowed a permit holder to be either a grower, a processor, or a distributor. You couldn't hold all three. And we had a lot of folks from the business end of this come to the board and I know reach out to various legislators about their concern about the viability of this as a business. One thing I think people that are at this conference might not quite understand is we are a very small state. We have about 1.8 million people. And we are also, unfortunately, I think at least in 2018 or 2019, we were listed as the poorest state in the union. So that's one of those things that I think a lot of people don't quite realize about the status here. But there was real concerns about making sure that this was viable from a business perspective so that it could help the people that are suffering from the various conditions really get something that can help them. And so essentially the law had to be tweaked to allow for vertical integration. It was tweaked to allow to get the banking fix in place. And it was also tweaked through our legislature ultimately this year to allow for dry leaf forms of medical cannabis. The initial law did not allow that. Our board met a number of times early on, and we were actually charged with putting a report together to the legislature and the governor. It was supposed to be there 2 years after the law was passed. We actually did it a year early because we saw the problems with the law, and so many people came to the board meetings and came to the West Virginia DHHR, where the Office of Medical Cannabis is, and expressed these concerns that we put our report out to the legislature early so they could start tackling these issues, and they did. That became something that became a bit of a political hot potato in some respects, particularly the dry leaf form, which was something that our board recommended. But ultimately, that's now been passed. It's the initial law allowed for medical cannabis cards to be provided by physicians that treat patients that had 15 conditions, ranging from Parkinson's disease to forms of cancer and other serious medical conditions that the legislature decided were appropriate for medical cannabis use. The physicians had to undergo additional training per the law, and actually the initial law even required a physician or a pharmacist to be on site at every dispensary during all hours of operation as medical cannabis would be dispensed. And a number of us on the board had concerns with that because physicians can't be in the business of prescribing cannabis per federal law. And that gets into all the issues of whether or not they're doing something that runs afoul of federal law. And you have the physicians and obviously the pharmacies are very concerned about maintaining their DEA certification. And marijuana is still a Schedule I drug federally. And so that was a major concern. And another thing that had to be taken out of the law and changed, and it was fixed by the legislature. But ultimately, there have been, I believe to date, there are 20-some physicians that have signed up to be able to prescribe medical cannabis. Well, excuse me, not prescribe medical cannabis, certify patients, because they can't prescribe, but certify patients for medical cannabis use. We expect that number will increase. My understanding is, and again, I'm on the advisory board, so the final decisions are made by our Department of Health and Human Resources Office of Medical Cannabis, which is under the executive branch. But my understanding from our last board meeting that we just had last week was they expect the doctors to start certifying patients and have cards beginning to be issued in March of 2021 for a full rollout of the program within a couple months of that. So they're expecting late spring of 2021. Our current law allows for 10 grower permits to be awarded. It allows for 10 processor permits and up to 100 dispensaries. And the dispensaries would be located at various geographical areas around the state of West Virginia, so long as a local county hasn't made a determination through their county commission or health department that they don't want a medical marijuana dispensary in their local county. But most of the counties have really stepped up and said that they're in agreement with the state law. And so we're hopeful that this is going to roll out and going to be in a position where really it'll be able to help the people that need it starting in the spring of 2021, and also be in a position where the state may see some of the economic benefits. I mean, again, we're a very poor state, and a lot of the folks that have come to our meetings and stressed how they want to get involved in this industry are talking about the number of West Virginia jobs this may create. And I know that that's kind of a political issue that Danielle could probably speak better to the politics of it than I can. But it is an issue that we've seen people from all walks of the business community come in and really stress that they think this is something that they might be able to help people with, not just the patients that need it, which is obviously the paramount concern and what was talked about by the legislature and the governor at the time this was enacted, but also help folks in various areas that really do need jobs in this state. And so I know I may be jumping around a little bit on the slides, but I think that's a general status of the applications and timeline moving forward. The Office of Medical Cannabis itself was created by the Act, and that's housed within our Department of Health and Human Resources, which I mentioned is underneath the executive branch. And so it answers ultimately to the governor and the cabinet secretary of our DHHR. But the Medical Cannabis Office was created. The director was appointed fairly quickly. And most of their role thus far has been really trying to write the legislative rules for this process and write the format for the permit bidding process. And now they've been scoring and dealing with all of that. They've also done that with some changes to the administration in our state and some changes within the DHHR itself. We've had several chairs of the board of the advisory board for medical cannabis due to changeover that we've had over the last couple of years. And that's sort of a reflection of how long it's taken to get the program out. But again, that really goes back to the original bill not quite being ready for prime time. But it is now, and it's moving out. The other roles that the Office of Medical Cannabis has is they're implementing a seed to sale tracking system, which I know other states have done. I know that representatives of our legislature and DHHR here actually traveled to Colorado early on in this process to kind of see the tracking system that's in place there, and we're very impressed with it. As Danielle mentioned, that's kind of the forefront that everybody goes to is, Colorado has been doing this for how many years, and here we are. So they're going to be tracking from the seed all the way to the sale of every product. They're also going to be able to inspect the facilities that are licensed. They're going to be able to issue permits and revoke permits. And there's background checks. There's issues in terms of making sure that there's no one with criminal records and other issues there, so that these the medical cannabis is done in a safe way, and that's one of the things that they're concerned about. But it is something that we really do see rolling out in early 2021, and it's going to be a tremendous benefit, to the community. So I'm happy to kind of jump into any other areas, but I know there's some things that Danielle wanted to talk about, so I'm going to maybe turn it back over to her at this point.
Thank you, Jesse. I may cover some items that have already been covered by you, but I wanted to sort of talk about what's next. What are the obstacles in West Virginia? Why did it maybe take us so long to get where we are? And, how can we move forward? What are the strategies? What are things that work in West Virginia and what may not work? As you discussed earlier, one of the major issues, and I think it's not only true with banking, but it's also true with legal services, accounting services, and others, is that some of these businesses that were looking to come to West Virginia and set up were going to service providers and saying, give me some advice about how to comply with your tax laws, or what's legal in West Virginia. And the service providers weren't sure whether they were even able to provide the services. And part of that reason is we have a U.S. attorney who's been vocal within his rights to do so, but has been vocal in his opposition to marijuana. And I think because of that, there has been a little bit of what I would describe as a scare effect. Even though West Virginia has passed a medical marijuana law, can we provide these services to these companies? What's it going to look like in the future? And so that, I think, has been part of why it's been slow. I also think, and some of you that are attending this conference may know this, but West Virginia is really at the center of the opioid crisis. And I think there, whether we like it or not, there is some concern of, is this going to be something else that is going to lead to additional issues for our residents? Or is it a solution? Is it something that may allow that not to become a problem for someone? So that's definitely an issue that I think it's difficult to navigate politically, and one you have to think about when you look at, moving the needle. And then, of course, Jesse touched on this. West Virginia is become a very conservative state, with its elected officials. One United States senator is a Republican, the other's a Democrat, pretty conservative Democrat. Right now, all three Congress people are Republicans. And then, of course, the House and Senate in West Virginia are controlled by the Republican Party, and there's a Republican governor in West Virginia. I don't see that changing. I mean, I guess you never know, but I suspect that's probably going to look pretty similar after next election in West Virginia. And so, y'all might be sitting here thinking, well, wait a second, you're telling me this. What's the hope in West Virginia? Well, what I can say is the Republican legislature passed the medical marijuana bill in West Virginia. Now, did it come across, I describe as a perfect storm, where you have folks that were strong advocates for marijuana, and then you had Republicans who were strong free market people, and you had those folks band together and say, this is something that we want. And I think if you're looking for a pathway forward in West Virginia, it's going to require what I would say that same, bipartisan, where you have the free market Republicans that are getting together with advocates within the Democratic Party. And I think with that group, you can get it done. Jesse's point is well taken. West Virginia's economy isn't the best in the country. We would like it to be better, but it isn't necessarily, where we want it to be. And I think we're always looking for, new ways to say, how can we invite businesses, West Virginia? How can we open our doors? And, this is a way where we can get investment in the state of West Virginia. And I think with the recent, push in Pennsylvania, so that's our neighbor. I don't see Ohio quite getting there yet, but I guess you never know. But with all of those things going on, there's going to be some pressure, I think, on the legislature to act on recreational marijuana. And I think that, as the members of the legislature who are elected become younger, I think party becomes less of an issue, because for young people, this issue isn't as polarizing as it can be for people who have maybe been around for 20 or 30 more years in elected office. I think as more young people get elected, it becomes less of a polarizing issue and more of what can we do to improve West Virginia's economy, and how can we do that safely? And I think if we're, able legislatively to be successful with the implementation of medical marijuana, even though it took a while, people see that this isn't a bad thing. They see the investment. They start seeing, the state making a little bit of money. they're going to say, you know what, maybe we can do this if we can do it safely, and here's what it would look like. So that's, sort of my my hope for West Virginia. I think that it may not be next year, it may not be the year after, but I think if it's approached in the right way, if you make the business case here, if you say, well, this is how the state is going to be able to move forward, there is a possibility of getting it done. I don't know what you think about that, Jesse, but that's my take on where things are.
No, I agree with you. I think that's a good assessment of exactly where we are, but also in terms of moving forward, I think you're exactly right. And that's what we've seen really at the advisory board level when we went around the state and had the initial meetings. It was amazing to see the number of folks that really were from the business community, and really you would expect to have a very conservative outlook on it, but we're looking at it more from an economic impact potentially, and then also a conservative value, I guess, of having the government stay out of their business sort of idea. So I think there's some of that there. It is interesting with at least the U.S. Attorney in the southern half of West Virginia currently, because there's been some very, very distinct messaging coming out that has had that scare effect, in particular with firearms. And we are a state that is very, very pro gun rights. And what we've seen there from some of the messaging has been that habitual users of Schedule I drugs can lose their firearm rights and could be prosecuted federally for that. I've got a background in criminal law and have handled a lot of those types of cases over the years. And you don't see it often for marijuana, but that's been something that's been hinted at. Not just here, it's been other areas around the country. When the Cole memo was rescinded by Jeff Sessions, I mean, you saw that in other areas around the country where there was discussion of the impact on firearm rights, because you essentially are getting a card certifying that you have a medical condition you need this for, and you're going to be in a database tracked getting cannabis. And that may not be an issue in a lot of places, but in West Virginia, where people have a really, really strong background in hunting and shooting and things involving guns, it can be. And so that's something that is out there as well. And it's just sort of the state of our state anyway. But I think that those are things that definitely we need to be mindful of moving forward. And if there's going to be an appetite at the legislative level here to legalize recreational marijuana, this medical program really has got to show the state and show the legislature what it can do, what it can do for the economy. I mean, could we look like a Colorado? I'm from here, so I'm biased, but we're a beautiful state. We've got, as far as the East Coast goes, we've got some of the best ski resorts you're going to get within a drive of Philadelphia or a drive of Washington, D.C. We have great fishing, whitewater rafting. We have a lot of outdoor activities. Now, obviously, we don't have 15,000 foot peaks, but we have nearly 5,000 foot peaks. And so, on the East Coast, that's something that we might be able to model after the Colorado image. And that's something I think people here really have an interest in exploring. And so it will be interesting to see how the legislature deals with it moving forward. But the medical cannabis has got to roll out, and they got to show that it's a safe product in terms of, it's not going to be out on the street. And, I have a background in criminal law, and you'd be amazed. I could tell you horror stories of people that have bought marijuana on the street thinking that's all they're buying, and find out that it's got some horrible substance laced in it, and then they're acting crazy for 3 days. And you're not going to see that here. I mean, you don't see it in Colorado because it is tracked from seed to sale. So it's a safer substance in a lot of ways, in that you're not out there buying an illegal street drug, particularly for cancer patients. So,
one of the things I was thinking as you were talking, and I think this will be probably another challenge to go from medical to recreational, and they've done it other places. So, certainly it doesn't mean we can't do it here, but how do you convince the employer community that, who has West Virginia, for those that are listening, there can be some difficulty to find employees in certain areas who could pass a drug test. And so I think there could be concerns from the construction trade, the manufacturing trade, that, are we going to be able to find employees who, could pass a drug test? What does this increase our liability? Do we have to, take a look at testing a different way? Do we have to change our policies? So, kind of getting that community there at the same time, I think will be important, because if they're okay, then the argument that these people are going to be coming to work high isn't going to be as viable if the employer community buys in.
Well, and I think the medical could help with that in a way, because you're going to see a lot of these folks are going to be people with pretty debilitating conditions and not likely in the workforce. But you're certainly going to have some effect on that. And I know that, it's like you said earlier, it's across every industry. You've got employers that have to worry about this. You've got, from the attorney community, there were some concerns on it ethically originally, whether attorneys could represent companies that wanted to get into this area. And there's been some varying opinions across the country on that, because there's some ethical rules that prohibit an attorney from helping a client engage in illegal activity. And it is still illegal federally, even if it's not prosecuted. So, there's a lot of things that we're in sort of a brave new world on, but hopefully seeing this come across might take away some of the concern that the employers have, or maybe it'll show them other concerns. But it certainly would be something that should be some food for thought for everybody moving forward. And this program is going to roll out here in early 2021, based on everything that I'm hearing. So I think that's where we're going to be. I don't know if we've covered all the slides at this point or not. I know we had 30 minutes. Tauheed, how are we looking?
I think we're close to being able to wrap up. And what I would say, if there's a takeaway, is maybe don't sleep on West Virginia. That, it took us a little longer. We might take a while rolling out, but keep your eyes on West Virginia. Watch these permits be awarded. Watch how the process goes. And, if you're looking at a place to invest, maybe think about, how you can move the needle in West Virginia. And, certainly, I'm optimistic. That's just my personality. I know there's kind of an uphill battle, but I think that there is a possibility that you could get recreational passed here in West Virginia. And I've hoped for, the future success of our medical marijuana program as it's rolled out.
Thanks, Danielle. I echo everything you just said. I think that's really right where we are. And hopefully we're going to see this program really kind of be a model for the potential that could come forward here in this state. And, I know we're running a little bit low on time. I tell people, if anyone wants to contact me, I know Tauheed, I think, has our information that you can get through the conference, but you can find me on my website, ForbesLawWV.com. You can email me at wjforbes@ForbesLawWV.com. Give me a call if you want, 304-343-4050, or find me on Twitter and shoot me a tweet. So it's good talking to you. I'm glad. I'm sorry we couldn't all be there in person. I know these are strange times, but I at least got to take my mask off for 30 minutes here by myself in my office, and I'm going to put it back on here in a minute.
I'm going to close with my contact information real quick. I'm dwaltz@jacksonkelly.com and 304-340-1160. Either of us would be, thrilled to talk with you. We both love West Virginia. We'd like to talk about it, and we welcome your ideas on how we can move the needle in West Virginia also. So thank you so much, Tauheed, for having us. Thank you, Jesse, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you both for really laying the foundation and letting people know what's happening in West Virginia. Like I mentioned, West Virginia isn't on a lot of people's radars, but hopefully this will give people more information to pique their curiosity and find out more on how they can participate and get.
Come visit.
Yeah,
we'd love to have you visit.
Beautiful. A lot of outdoors. I've been told it's a beautiful state. Thank you so much for presenting the West Virginia State of State Cannabis Report. We are going to be fielding questions from people who may have more questions about West Virginia and whatnot. So we will move to the live Q&A portion and see if anyone wants to ask any specific questions, or if y'all want to extrapolate a little bit on the topics, or just, hype up West Virginia a little bit more. But for those who are watching this current session, this concludes the recorded version of our West Virginia State of State Cannabis Report. I'm Untitled Chapter with the CannAtlantic Conference, and thank you for tuning in. Hello, everyone. So you just heard the State of State Cannabis Report for West Virginia. We have one of the speakers, Jesse Forbes, here to talk a little bit more about what's going on in West Virginia. Jesse, thank you so much for joining on this Saturday.
Hey, happy to be here. And good morning, or maybe afternoon at this point to everybody.
This day is going by so quickly. Everything feels like a blur. But real quick, I'm going to see if there's any other questions specifically for you in about West Virginia.
Sure.
And if not, I will certainly ask my own. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop a question in the chat and we'll bring that on. But Jesse, in terms of your hopes, I guess, do you think because the election is coming up in November that, there's a whole lot of interest in cannabis reform leading up to the election? Do you think that anything that happens in November is going to influence West Virginia's market at all?
I think there certainly is a potential for that. I mean, one thing that was alluded to or talked about by myself and Danielle was we do have a U.S. attorney in the Southern District here that's been very, very adamant about an opposition to marijuana generally. And there's been a lot of tweets about that subject and about the potential for prosecution. And so obviously, depending on what happens nationally, in the event that Biden wins and we have a new U.S. attorney here, that very well might impact the appetite of the legislature as to what they would want to do. There's also some competitive races locally in our state legislature. And so there's a potential there, although we talked about it in the presentation. I mean, I've grown up, lived pretty much all my life, other than I lived in North Carolina for law school, but most of my life in West Virginia. We were a Democratic stronghold. I mean, we were the state of, John Rockefeller and Robert Byrd were our senators. And, we've been historically Democratic registration and voted Democratic from the 1930s until about 10 years ago. And our current governor was actually elected as a Democrat. He was an ally of Joe Manchin, and he flipped and became a Republican about a year after he was elected and put his arms around Donald Trump. So there are things that can change, both of the national elections, and if some of the local people get some help here, it very well could change the makeup of the legislature, and there may be a better appetite for passing recreational. So that's definitely something that's here, and we're looking at the election to see how it affects the appointments to the various U.S. attorneys here, how it could affect the local appetite for the legislature and their feelings. So yeah, I think the election is something that is strong. Although obviously, from a presidential perspective, our state was overwhelmingly supportive of Donald Trump last time. And that seems to be what it's looking like right now, despite the Joe Biden sign that I have in my yard. So,
in terms of your projections, what do you think the market's going to look like in terms of 2021? Do you think it's going to start off pretty smoothly? Do you think that things? I mean, we know that when markets or licenses are given out, the market is still starting to get up. There's always some sort of kerfuffle or some sort of hurdle that kind of makes everything kind of start slower than people anticipated. Do you see this to be a smooth rollout?
Well, one thing that I'm hopeful about with that is that we have taken so long to roll it out that I'm really hopeful that most of those kinks have been ironed out, because there's been sort of a push by the people that passed the bill and then by the people who are trying to get the bids awarded to them to push this out and roll it out. I mean, these people have had warehouse space leased for a very long time to find out whether or not they're going to get a permit. So the fact that it has taken so long since the initial law was passed makes me hopeful that we'll be in a position where it really does run out smoothly. I know that they intend to start issuing cards to patients several months prior to actually having product in dispensaries. So I think that could be hopeful too. It certainly looks like the timeline now is late spring of 2021. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed for a very smooth transition into this actually going live in West Virginia.
Jesse, thank you so much for joining. We are running a little bit behind, so unfortunately we have to move forward with this, but I really appreciate your time here. Can you give people a little bit, just another second for how they can contact you and how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. As I said, you can get on my website. I'm in Charleston, West Virginia. I'm an attorney here. It's ForbesLawWV.com. Email me, wjforbes at ForbesLawWV.com, or give me a call, 304-343-4050. Happy to talk to you about anything West Virginia related. And hopefully, as a result of maybe even this conference with the people around the region hearing about this, we'll get some more attention in West Virginia and really maybe look at ways that we could potentially roll this out here. So give me a call or shoot me an email. I'm on Twitter. Hit me on there, whatever makes sense to you. So thanks for having me, Tauheed.
Of course. Thank you for joining. Like I mentioned earlier in the introduction, West Virginia and Delaware were the two states that were not represented in last year's conference. So thank you for joining and making this regional conference whole now.